This is a 2024 Marin Larkspur 2. It is a little bit of an unusual bike and goes beyond any sort of categorization. In today's video, I am going to talk about the quirks and features and give it my Graham score. So hang on and watch another Bike Bros YouTube bike review video, and we're going to discuss this interesting bike. If doing my Doug DeMuro impersonation was ever appropriate, it would be on this bike because it really is an unusual one and one that I'm a big fan of. This is the Marin Larkspur, the 2024 version of the Larkspur 2. This isn't a brand new bike, but this is a new color and refresh on a bike that's already been out for, I believe, 3 years. It has been a surprisingly popular model over the last 3 years, which is why I'm doing a video on this. At one point, I thought that this was such a niche bike and so unusual that making a video really wouldn't be that useful because there were too few people out there that would be really interested in learning about it. But from the last 3 years' sales, we've basically seen that if these are in stock, somebody is going to find them on our website and come in, and they just keep on selling. So we've been fans of the bike the entire time because it does some really interesting things and it really brings up some emotions of just wanting to be a complete idiot and take this out to the local mountain bike trails and just ride past people on a bike that shouldn't be there or looks like it shouldn't be there with a huge grin on your face, because I suspect that that's what would happen. So this Larkspur 2, it is one of 2 Larkspurs that Marin makes. Like I said, a new color, black this year. It was a sort of glittery gold last year. And then there's also a Larkspur 1, which this year has a beautiful blue color. We only bring in this Larkspur 2, and as I discuss the sort of components on this, hopefully I can convince you why that is the case. This Larkspur 2 is a 32.2 pound chromoly mixty frame shape, so that's what we confuse people with, calling that frame shape, instead of calling it a ladies bike or a drop top tube bike, they're referred to as a mixty. 32.2 pounds and $1,449 in Canada, and in the States, $999. That Larkspur 1 that I mentioned, the blue one, that is $1,099 in Canada or $799 USD. So I'm going to talk about some of the details of this bike and then talk about why it is beyond classification and why it is more than what meets the eye at first for a lot of people. So stick with me and let's talk about this bike, and maybe you're one of those bike geeks out there who has silly ideas for ways to ride this bike, or maybe you're somebody like a lot of our customers who just looks at it as a very practical bike for your cafe cruiser kind of a bike. So I'm going to talk to you about this bike. So if you're not used to these videos, my name is Graham. I'm the owner of Bike Bros, a bicycle shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada. And basically these videos are a way to show people the details on bikes, talk about the details and what maybe is or isn't a good spec choice, what's interesting, and what may not be obvious from looking at a bike just on the Marin or from a retailer website. And I tend to try and pick bikes to do on these reviews that maybe just don't get a lot of media coverage, but obviously there are a lot of people that are out there looking for information about them. Our shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada, as I said, we're a Marin, Rocky Mountain, Giant, and Pivot dealer. And we carry a pretty broad range from e-bikes, gravel bikes, a lot of mountain bikes, kids bikes, and then some of the stuff that's really interesting, bikes like this one. So to start with, on the specifications on this bike, I mentioned that it's a chromoly frame. For those not familiar, chromoly is just a strong, light type of steel, as opposed to a lot of bikes these days would be just called alloy, which would be some sort of aluminum alloy. This is a ferrous alloy or a steel alloy, known for being light, strong, extremely durable, and also having a ride quality that just adds a little bit of extra comfort to a bike. And so that is just, when you talk about steel, it's not like it's flexible, like this thing is noodly and doing this business. But steel just likes to absorb a certain frequency of vibration that tends to give a very nice feel. And people have summed that up saying it's sort of like riding with just a few extra PSI in your tires, like it just sort of softens the feel. Going to the specifications on this, this is a Shimano Dior 11-speed drivetrain with an 11 to 51 tooth cassette on there and no front derailleur. So this is where we're taking a lot of inspiration from mountain bikes, going as far as using Dior level, which is getting into performance mountain bike stuff. And with a clutch, this thing is your clutch, this little lever that I am jiggling. A clutch's purpose basically is in the off position. This reduces chain tension so you can take off your wheel without battling a lot of chain tension. And then when you're actually using the bike, you put that in the on position, and then you have a very stiff spring in here. And that combined with a narrow wide chainring on the front here, this is a special sort of way of doing the chainring teeth, that all combines to a bike that is really capable in an off-road situation. And by capable, meaning that you're not going to go over bumps and have your chain bouncing around on the cassette or bouncing off your front chain rings, which is one of the benefits of having a 1x drivetrain. Because this cassette is so huge, you still get an equivalent sort of gear range as to like a 27-speed bike from the past, but just all done with shifting on those 11 gears and all done from a single shifter up here. As we go in further into the components on here, there will be another thing that ties into why that makes a lot of sense too. On the frame, while we're at the back of the bike here, we do have fender and pannier threaded eyelets here, as well as the eyelets there and underneath that little brace on the seat stay. So this thing is fully capable of attaching fenders and racks to it. The tires that are on here, this is a 27.5 inch wheel. So that is, 27.5 inches. It could go up to 29 on some mountain bikes. 27.5 is a very practical sort of a size for something like this, especially because they're going with a 2.35 width tire on here. What that's going to do for you, and in this particular V-tire GPV that they put on, it is a tire that is designed in the center of the tread to be ridden on pavement and stuff, but a little bit of extra tread on the side. So this can be nice and fast rolling on pavement with that smooth center. And then if you do get into riding this into gravel or even trail situations, you could just lower the tire pressure a little bit. And I think this is going to be a pretty appropriate all-rounder sort of a tire. Going forward, I mentioned briefly, we do have a 1x drivetrain on this, and that is a steel chainring with narrow wide tooth profile. You can see, I hope that those teeth they alternate between narrow and wide teeth to match up with the inner and outer plates of your chain. We go from crank lengths from 170 on this size small up to 175 millimeter cranks on the medium and large. And that brings up the fact that this only comes in 3 sizes. So people like me who are 6'1", one of my frustrations has been I would love to take one of these things and have it as a bike for just blasting around and being a complete idiot on. But it's probably not something that 6'1", I would get something that would feel all too comfortable. Part of the step-through design here, once again, we called that mixty instead of calling it a ladies' bike. And part of that naming sort of system is trying to get away from people thinking of this frame shape as being a ladies' bike. There are some practical things to having a low top tube for guys, and I'm sure you can imagine right off the bat reasons why a low top tube can make sense for some guys. There's some extra bracing in here And this is to give some additional stiffness to the rear end, because if we just had an old school mixed e-bike with just this tube coming down, the rear end as you're going around corners would be quite unstable as far as its lateral strength and stiffness. The cranks that are on here are using an external bearing threaded BB. So this once again is fully mountain bike or gravel type technology. Everything about this bike is worthy of its $14.49 price tag. This isn't just taking a comfort bike, putting a dropper seat post on it and a Dior derailleur and saying this is good. There are a lot of things about this frame that are very good as far as its quality of sort of shape and materials. For people unfamiliar with this wacky category of bike, before I forget, 32.2 pounds, did I mention that yet? So a reasonable weight, not a boat, not super lightweight, but a reasonable weight for this. For those people unfamiliar with stuff like this, I would encourage you to look up a company called Stooge Cycles from the UK. They do a number of different models that are all taking sort of inspiration from the original clunkers from the birth of mountain biking, and specifically applicable to Marin, the birth of mountain biking in Marin County, California, where mountain biking, that was one of the birthplaces of mountain biking. What they were doing in those days was taking these Schwinn paperboy bikes, and with a coaster brake, no gears back then, but basically they were riding up and down mountains, especially down mountains, fast and like lunatics. And so a lot of this bike's shape comes from that inspiration of taking a bike that looks like it's meant for one thing, but making it capable of being ridden like you're a nincompoop. I mentioned the dropper seat post on here. That is another thing that goes with that nincompoop sort of riding attitude. For those unfamiliar, I'll see if I can do this in such a way that we can watch what's going on here. I'm putting out feet on my little, let's see. Go to there. I've never done this, like putting up on. And so dropper seat post, I've got a lever at the handlebar, and that just gives you a way that your seat goes up and down. So in mountain biking, that has become almost sort of a necessity for people that actually ride mountain bikes. These days, once you learn to ride with a dropper post, you realize how vital it is being able to get your seat out of the way. That same thing would apply on here if you chose to ride this like a nincompoop, but it also applies, like I have this on my gravel bike, and I use that bike as everything from like 100 kilometers sort of a day kind of a bike, or just blasting around town. And I find that when I'm in traffic, if I need to stop, being able to just pop your seat down that little bit means I don't have to do ballerina toes to get my foot to the ground. I can sit comfortably at a light, and then as I get moving again, I just pop my seat back up, and it just makes riding very comfortable in a city environment, having that sort of a feature. So that is the one thing, the reason why we sort of picked this Larkspur 2 as the bike that we carry in inventory as opposed to the Larkspur 1, is because I find that seat post, the dropper seat post, is a really critical part of this whole package, sort of making a lot of sense for its broad range of abilities. The other things that would differ between the Larkspur 1 and the Larkspur 2, so the Larkspur 2 gets that dropper post. The Larkspur 1 is also a 10-speed micro shift drivetrain as opposed to this 11-speed. They actually have the same gear range, so I'm not going to put too much emphasis on that because I actually quite like the Microshift Advent X drivetrain. But one place that you might notice a bit more difference on this Larkspur 2, we've got these Shimano hydraulic discs, which have a really nice feel at the lever. They are just known for that. On the Larkspur 1, they're using a Tektro hydraulic disc brake on there, which feels just a little bit more blocky. Still a decent brake, but feels a little bit more blocky. So for really noticeable functional things between the Larkspur 1 and 2, the big thing is that dropper seat post on there. That's important. For those of you who are sort of bike geeks, Some things you might be interested in regarding geometry on here are this has a 69-degree head tube angle. So while that isn't a 64-degree sort of head tube angle like a sort of hardcore trail or enduro bike, that is a slacker head tube than what we're sort of used to seeing on any of the bikes that have this shape. And so that once again is trying to make a bike that sort of looks like a cafe cruiser kind of a bike, but if between home and a cafe happens to have a couple clicks of really fun single track that you can go blasting, this bike is just going to be a fun one to do that on. As I mentioned with the frame, we've got all these mounting positions on the back. We also have cargo mounting positions on the fork here as well. So this could be for something like an anything cage, some way of carrying cargo. And we also still have the threaded eyelets to be able to put fenders on here. So this thing with full wrap fenders would maybe make a lot of noise if it was in the off-road setting. But if you decided to get one of these with the primary use being blasting to work or the cafe or just looking super cool riding around your city, you've got the ability to put a full wrap fender on there. As we go forward on the details, actually I will just point out these are the new Marin Oso plastic pedals basically that they're putting on here. We quite often will talk about when we see plastic pedals being offered on a stock bike, we'll talk about them being basically test rider pedals and being garbage. The bearings feel better quality than a lot of the plastic pedals on bikes. And I think for a city application, this is actually a really nice pedal. You don't have quite as sharp a tooth on there. So less likely to gouge into your shin or anything, but still a pronounced enough sort of pins on the pedals for them to be like a practical thing to use. And so you're not being pushed into upgrading. We'll also do the usual. I'll try and point out what kind of tire clearance we have. So this has 2.35 tires on here. I think you could get away if you wanted to be a complete nincompoop. You could be riding probably 2.5 inch wide tires on here. And though it might not be totally straightforward, you could probably even set them up tubeless on those rims if you were going to really take this thing to the limits. I don't know what it is about us bike people, but there seems to be a thing in our brain that whenever you see a bike, you're always trying to go at least one, if not two categories beyond what it was ever designed for. So I do imagine somebody out there is going to be riding like a Black Diamond trail and filming their ridiculousness on a trail on a bike like this, because you probably could pick your way through a trail like that. I think it would be super fun to ride it on like relatively smooth, flowy green and blue trails. Like I think for a skilled rider, this would just be such a blast. And you know that you're going to just be giggling inside every time somebody looks at you with that, what the heck is this person doing kind of feeling. Stems, all the bikes. So of course, reach on the bike. So this kind of horizontal distance, that is one of the main things that's going to be changing between the sizes. Like I said, 3 sizes. Also this distance in here, the head tube length is going to change between them. And like I also said, even in the largest size, I would struggle being 6'1" and change to get a bike that really felt comfortable for anything beyond. If I was just doing cafe cruising, I'd be thrilled. But if I was going to ride it like I would be tempted to ride it on trails, I would probably feel a little bit too compact on the bike. That does bring up a little bit of discussion on here. I'm trying to show you sort of a line across the grips and showing where they line up compared to where the center of the steer tube is and the stem. It's one of the things that if you were going to be a nincompoop on this bike, you would maybe be looking for bars with a little bit less sweep, so that just if you're getting into tight situations, with these really, really pronounced mustache bars like this, I find that you can pretty quickly in a tighter turn feel like your handlebar and your leg want to take up occupy the same space. So just a thing to think about. I do think these bars in general, they're probably about a 25 degree, maybe 30 degree sweep. Super, super comfortable. You'll probably, like we do on this bike here, You'll have your bars angled ever so slightly down, so you have downward and rearward sweep, not upward and backward sweep like you do on mountain bikes. But that's just part of what makes these feel really comfortable. You got these gum grips on here, they're pretty comfortable. Like I said, Shimano hydraulics. I think all of the different sizes use a 70mm stem, and all of them use this same handlebar. And these bars are all, what did I see in here? 700mm wide, so wide enough that they are thinking you're going to ride this like a goof and wanting a little bit of extra control. I didn't mention it, but we've got quick releases, front and rear. That's about the only other thing that could have been added to this bike to really scream ride way beyond this bike's looks. If it put through axles on there, but it might be saving Marin from some issues of people really getting carried away if it had through axles on there. So what do you think of this thing? Does this excite you as much as it excites many of us in the shop? If you like this sort of thing, maybe follow along, like the video, give me an idea of what you think of this in the comments below, or ask questions. I try to pay attention to those questions and reply when I can understand the question. So thanks so much for watching, and we will see you again in a future video on the Doug DeMiro Looks at Crazy Bikes Inspired YouTube page. Cheers, happy trails.